we were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here. It's here, and it's not visiting anymore.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Who Dat Jedi podcast. This is episode 138, take 2. I was having some technical difficulties at the onset, but you weren't here for it, so that's okay. But anyway, no. As always, I am Aaron, and with me is Dave and Fredo. Happy belated Thanksgiving, gentlemen.
Same to you.
Happy belated Thanksgiving, and glad you were able to fix the Falcon.
Yeah, right. I just need to just smack. I was about ready to just smack the machine. All right, but
I gotta put that sound effect in now. I gotta go find that sound effect.
Right. So tonight we're going to talk about the final episode of Andor. I have to tell you guys, actually, that this is one of the first Star Wars shows on Disney Plus that I've gone back and started to rewatch like almost immediately after the final episode. And I think that says something. And I encourage everybody to do that, by the way, because there is so much, unless you watch the episodes multiple times when they came out, there's so much I think you miss. Especially anytime Nemec speaks. It's like there are jewels in those lines. But anyway, no, like I said, I started rewatching some of it, and we're going to just kind of get our thoughts down on this season finale. So, but before that, like I said, I was actually this morning listening. We're in the presence of greatness here. I was listening to the Saints Happy Hour podcast, and all of a sudden they started yelling out the fact that Nola Fredo is in the chat. And Fredo, we haven't heard from Fredo forever. So that was Nola Fredo has entered the chat.
He has. Listened to them for quite a while when they started out. So, it's always nice to be remembered. It's a good sign. It's a good sign that they're not. Oh darn, that's that Fredo. Get rid of him.
There's that guy again. No, they're totally excited. So, anyway, and not that anybody listening to this podcast cares, but Nebraska finally won a game, and we have a new coach. We don't need to talk about that. My only things I have against him is that he wasn't Mickey Joseph, and he coached the Carolina Panthers. It's the only two things I can hold over his head right now. Whoever they get to coach that team, as long as they start winning, I'll pass judgment. So anyway, yeah. So, but like I said, Nebraska beat Iowa, so there's that. And Dave, your team is going for the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, we got TCU this weekend. It'll be. We played them pretty close last time in Fort Worth, and this is going to be more of a neutral field, even though it's in Dallas. The fans will be split pretty evenly, I'm guessing. So, but we'll see.
But the hot team in town is Tulane. Wow, I mean, talk about being in the upside down. With all due respect, I mean that's awesome for Tulane fans. My sister, who was the athletic trainer at Tulane for a number of years, she was so excited that Tulane was on ABC. She's like, she's like FS2, ESPNU, yeah, I can, but ABC. So she was stoked. But anyway, so we're getting towards the end of college football season. We'll see how it all goes down. So anyway, well, let's start off with some trivia to get us into the Star Wars mood here. All right, so going to Fredo. What type of vehicle delivers the Emperor to the second Death Star?
Is that the...
Without looking at the back of the card right now, I will tell you that I will accept two. There are one of two answers that are acceptable to me.
So like the easy way to answer it's like the Imperial shuttle, or it's like the Tidarian class shuttle.
So I would have. Okay, they say. Oh, there. Okay, so three answers, because the answer on the back of the card is an Imperial shuttle. I mean,
Okay.
that's like, what car did Aaron drive to work? Aaron's car.
Oh, right.
But I would have accepted Shuttle Tidarium. No, actually, Shuttle
Yeah.
Tidarium was the one that they took to Endor, so I would not have taken that one. But a Lambda class shuttle, I would have taken. So
Okay.
that's getting nerdy here, but we'll talk about Kyber crystals
That's what we
later.
do.
Dave, what duo do 6 troopers try to capture just prior to the Ewoks' surprise attack? What duo do 6 troopers try to capture just prior to the Ewoks' surprise attack?
I'm pretty sure that would be C-3PO and R2-D2.
It is C-3PO and R2-D2. Very, very
Mhm.
good. All right, and to me, who survives a crash landing on Coruscant landing strip and jokes another happy landing? That was Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Hello there.
Da, 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 da. Sometime we should actually play the Star Wars Trivial Pursuit DVD game, 3 of us head to head, and see what happens.
I'm coming in dead last.
See
I know
how
that
see how
much.
long that takes that game to get to a conclusion. We might record that as a podcast. All right. Well, we got a couple little Star Wars news tidbits, and it's like here it comes back round again. What do we got first off, Fredo?
So right quick, last weekend Netflix released The Glass Onion, which is the sequel to Knives Out. So Ryan Johnson's been doing the interview tour, and while in talking to Hollywood Reporter, somebody came up and asked him, "Hey, wait a minute! Now you're making stuff for TV or streaming in this case. Lucasfilm is very aggressively pursuing a series. Is there a Star Wars series you'd like to make?" Now, of course, Ryan Johnson, for those of you who might forget, was at one point going to make his own Star Wars movie trilogy. But this is what he says, quote, "I will do a Star Wars anything. And if I had an idea that I was excited about that worked better as a show than a movie, I would do it that way. At the moment, we're in between making the next Benoit Blanc movie. That's the character Daniel Craig plays, and thinking about Poker Face. I keep getting together with Kathy Kennedy, having conversations. So who knows? Making The Last Jedi was the best experience in my life, so I should be so lucky." End quote. Now, it doesn't tell you doesn't have an idea that doesn't think would work as a movie, but it just tells you doesn't sound like he's making a movie anytime soon in
Yeah.
Star Wars.
And it's interesting that he mentions the show aspect, because that plays into a little bit of I don't think we talked about it last time on the show. I don't think it happened, but Bob Iger is taking over for Bob Chapek as CEO of Disney, and I saw an article. It was like Bob Iger is going to fix Disney's Star Wars problem, whatever that is. I didn't read the rest of the article, but what people have said is that Bob Chapek kind of went all in on Disney Plus, and Disney Plus revenues are down, as Dave has prognosticated before on this show, and Disney stock is not doing so well, and prices are going up in the parks and everything like that. So I would not be surprised if we get another little bit of pump of the brakes for shows coming out on Disney Plus, and that I don't know. It just seems like we've spent too much attention over there, and not attention over here. And so I think Bob Iger is going to bring the needle more towards the center. I don't know. So I would love to see Ryan Johnson's stuff, but I think now it's probably going to be, a little bit longer.
He's being coy, so it's really hard to sort of take anything from it, right? I could do TV. I could do a movie, who knows? He may not know. Like, again, his ideas, it sounds like, are still sort of gestating and so the back of his brain somewhere. But I also feel like he could be lying about that. They could have a script practically ready to go, and he could just dive straight into it tomorrow. The point is, he doesn't want to take any attention away from the movie he's trying to promote now. Yeah. As far as Iger goes, like, there's a lot you can say about this situation. I mean, we could go probably a whole show with this, and I think like the biggest thing that jumps out to me with this is that he was very committed to the movies, and like maybe to the franchise's detriment in terms of keeping a schedule and making sure that those movies came out on a tight schedule. And we saw it with the last two films that we got, that they might have been a little rushed. People have talked about Force Awakens actually being a little bit rushed. I think those sorts of critiques are somewhat valid. We've talked about that stuff on the show before. It's like Solo came out way too soon after Last Jedi, and then Rise of Skywalker came out way too soon after that, and then Rise of Skywalker felt half-baked.
Do you think that was because like investors, and the board, they want to see the ROI, right away? I mean, they want to see their return, because they just spent how many $1 billion buying Lucasfilm, and it's like, now get Star Wars stuff out quick so they can see that we mean business, and so we can start seeing some of this money back. And then he was the one that then said, okay, we're going to pump the brakes and we're not going to release so many things out so quickly. But also, Star Wars Prison is being offered at a discount to DVC members. So there's the first brick falling on that one. But anyway, so
Iger's a really interesting guy, though. And he's like, well, really well respected. He's done so much in this industry, and like, it's certainly an indictment of his successor. But I would caution anybody that says, oh, he's going to fix Star Wars, whatever that means.
Right.
It's like there were some cracks in the foundation before he ever handed this thing off.
Yeah, and just to think back, there was a point a couple of years ago where I think everybody was suggesting that Disney's plan for December was to have basically alternating Avatar and Star Wars movies. So they would have like a Star Wars movie come out one December, then an Avatar sequel, then another Star Wars movie, then another Avatar sequel. Well, the first one of those Avatar movies is coming out this month, upcoming, and I believe they've said that in order for it to be profitable, it's got to make like $2 billion, which globally, which when you think about it, that's an insane amount of money to be expecting to make back.
And is anybody,
because even in the best,
is anybody really that, like, was that turned on over the first Avatar that they can't wait to see the sequel? I mean, I
no.
I'm sure those fans are out there, right? Like, this is the thing I always come back to. I was like, oh my gosh, does anybody talk about Avatar in the same sort of glowing terms? And like the devoted fan that I'm like, I can't wait for that. I got my Avatar action figures, and I'm, it's just like that picture does not align, right? Like, it never aligned. So yeah, Cameron's amazing. He's an amazing filmmaker, and he has an incredible capacity for filming things that we've never seen before. And I think like that's the draw. It's not Avatar. It's
Yeah.
what's Cameron going to do next?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, and I think that kind of makes it, it puts it to a point of, well, that was the expectation that Disney's investors got sold on, and hey, at the very least, Cameron's delivering his end of the bargain. We need Star Wars to be delivering their end of the bargain, and we don't just mean fun, great shows on Disney Plus. So we'll see.
The other thing I'll just say really briefly, quickly here is just that, like, a lot of the people are using this as an excuse to bash Kathleen Kennedy again. And again, that ground is well covered by now. But I do want to just reflect very briefly on the fact that we had 3 live action Star Wars shows this year.
yeah.
Like, I actually had to like sit back and like do the math on this because Boba Fett was earlier this year,
Hmm.
and then we got Obi-Wan, and then we got Andor, and it's like, how spoiled are we at this point? And I know not everybody loved all of it, but
How
if you
spoiled
didn't
and
love all
how
of it, you could pick the one you do love and
It's
watch
like
that.
20 hours of Star Wars content in one year.
and
That's
how
Oh my
10
gosh.
spoiled
movies.
how spoiled and how egotistical are we to think that, oh, Bob Iger is here, he's going to fix Star Wars, as if Star Wars is, the only thing in Disney and the worst thing that's going on with Disney right now. Like I said, I go back, I mean, they've raised prices to the point where their whole strategy was, we need to keep crowds down, so we're gonna price people out so they can't go to Disney World. It's only going to be, the uber rich, and, or the people with no kids, and it's like, it's that's contrary to what Walt Disney, like Brittany and I were talking about this. I said, unless Walt Disney only wanted rich kids to go to Disneyland, which could be, I don't know, but I don't think so. He wanted a place for everybody. And if your company strategy became, like Cartman Land, so only allow a couple people in a day, that's not a moneymaker. And then so they've got a lot of other things they need to fix beyond Star Wars. But what's going right with Star Wars, if there is a ship to turn around on Star Wars, then they need to look to Tony Gilroy and the Andor series, because aesthetically, just storytelling wise, I still say, and you've got one more news point here about Diego Luna talking about season 1, season 2,
Hmm.
but I mean, this is the best written Star Wars, and I'm not saying that Tony Gilroy has to write everything now, but if you want to study how to write new and good Star Wars, here you go. So anyway,
Yeah, and actually, no, and you're right, and yeah, because both Tony Gilroy as well as Diego Luna have been doing also interviews in ahead of the finale last Wednesday, and but they both talked to Collider. But I'll just mention one brief section, a pretty good interview that Diego Luna does with them, where he kind of talks about, you know, the fact that they took some risks, and that what connected with people were the very things that they kind of stepped over the line and risked for. They're like, wow, we can't believe that that things are paying off the way that we thought that they would. But I'll bring up one point that is because that's one of the talking points I think for this episode is Collider asked Diego about Cassian's sister and his search for her. So he starts by saying, "I don't think so. I don't think that search is over. I don't think it's ever over. I don't think it's over in Rogue One because I see that as one thing." So it's like it's one of those things that kind of follow every decision you make and you're never letting go anymore. And I think that's behind the decision on that suicide mission in Rogue One. That's for his sister. That's for Marva. That's for his people, his community. Then he says this: I love the arc that Tony has built, and that arc ends in Rogue One, not in season two. And I think it's going to be quite amazing to watch Rogue One after you see season two. I think you'll see a different film, and for sure you'll understand the character from a different perspective, and you'll be with him in a different way.
Star Wars.
So I love the fact that they're thinking that way. They're not just, oh, we're not just making one season, we're not making two seasons. They're going to be making something that's going to stretch for these two seasons into Rogue One. And I think Tony Gurro said in this interview that season two will pick up a year after
Yeah.
where this episode ended.
Star Wars Underworld podcast mentioned talking about this similar thing. I mean, it's like this is we just got Act One, and season two is going to be Act Two, and Rogue One is Act Three. So that I like that as well. I like that as well. I also saw a Tony Gilroy interview that he said that nobody's dying in between that year jump. Said if they made it to the end, then we can assume that they're alive. So we never saw Keno Lloyd die. So he may have gotten out. He may be swimming. But anyway, no. Anyway, like I said, anybody who we're not going to have, that doesn't mean all characters are coming back. I would guess probably most. But anyway.
Yeah, I can guess that most of the characters we saw around that funeral scene on Ferrex are the ones that we're going to be looking back to in season 2.
It's going to be really interesting structurally to think about this show. And again, a lot of people are kind of like, are you sure, Tony? Are you sure are you going to do it this way? You don't want to maybe add another season in there because you're going from a very compact time frame to, just like years spanning like different time periods over a 12 episode arc, we think. And then you're going to another really compact time frame with the movie. So you're telling Cassian's story in that way with like a lot of focus on this part of his life and a lot of focus on this other part of his life later on. And then in the middle is going to be kind of herky-jerky, jump around a little bit. So it's interesting.
It's funny that you say that, because then if you look at the original trilogy, if you just have those back to back, we have a 1 year time jump between A New Hope and Empire, and then we have a 3 year jump from Empire to Jedi, or 2 or something like that. And
it's like 2 and 1, I think, something like that.
And we're telling Luke Skywalker's story in kind of a herky-jerky thing. So I think it also gets back to, it's like, you have this medium, why can't you just make more? It'll be interesting to see how they put it together.
Ultimately, it didn't really matter a lot with The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens like being smashed together either, like, because that was a real departure from the typical structure that we had seen, and that was like 2000th on the list of complaints that we could end up having about that trilogy. It's like, yeah, those two movies are close together in time, so what? But at the time it felt weird. It was kind of like, what is that gonna work? How's that gonna flow just fine.
So I do like, okay, so let's talk about the finale.
If I could do it again, I'd wake up early and be fighting these bastards from the start. Fight the Empire!
And I just want to get to the very end real quick first. I love how this season ended like the first act of a musical, where everything has been set up and introduced. There's been stuff going on, and then it's like the first act usually ends not on a it has a note of, all right, now let's go. What the conflict is going to be, and that I just thought that they set it up. I just love the way this ended.
So just real quick before, because Diego Luna talks about that in this interview that he did with Collider. They ask him about that final scene, and he says, I think you could read his mind at the end. What he's saying is, this is no life. Take this thing I have away from me, because it means nothing unless you let me fight for freedom. He's saying there's no point of living like this. He finally gets it. And I think that's part of the point of that final moment is when you see the start of the show, it's Cassian out on his own, trying to figure things out, doing the thing that he needs to do for himself because he's not really worried about anybody else. And the journey that he went through across these 12 episodes leaves him at a point where he recognizes he has to live for something more. There's something bigger that needs to set out to do. And that moment really puts it on its point of, I'm not going back to the guy I was in that first episode. The guy who just shot a couple of corporal guys just because he needed to get away. No, if I'm going to be doing something, it's for the greater good.
Well, all right. So, like I said, I just wanted to say that about the end real quick. So, but let's talk about the high points of this finale. First of all, I had to stop and think: is that the first time we've seen? It's not the first time we've seen instruments, but it's the first time. I mean, you could tell. I loved how they had a flute and they just put some things on it, and they took a French horn and they kind of bent out the bell, you know. But we got a second line on Ferrex, that type of thing. But anyway, so the whole deal is like, all right, we're gonna let them have their funeral, and so that basically trying to set the trap to get Cassian back, and Cassian is in Ferrex. So I don't know. So the trap is set, but the thing I loved is how, first of all, they said it's going to start a couple hours from now, and then boom, they started on their own time frame. And that sets the whole tone for everything. It's like, the anvil, starts kicking in, and they started on their own time frame.
And that first off, that absolutely, you're 100% right. That's exactly what they intended to do. They're going, well, you can do it at this time. Wait a minute, they're starting early. Now we're completely off guard. The other thing too is they completely misjudged Cassian's intent. They thought he wanted to be there,
front and center,
and partake in the funeral procession in some way. And failing that, he'd be hiding nearby, but still trying to observe. And we're going to nab him there. And again, for him, it was entirely a misdirect. At least when he realized that his friend was captured and that he could potentially get her out. And that became the priority for him. And they did not see that coming at all.
So there's the thing is that, and getting back to that a little bit, is that I said, I think I told you in the first take of this podcast, I went back and started watching Andor, starting from season 1. I recommend everybody to do that because you pick up on so many things. For example, as you were just talking about that, Dave, the conversation between Cassian and Nemec in the Aldani arc, and Nemec was talking about basically playing by the rules type of thing, and Cassian said you're half right. Said the Empire doesn't take the time to learn the rules, and it was said in a very pessimistic way. But I mean, that's what Ferrex is like. Okay, they set these rules. Well, we're going to play by the Empire's rules, which is to not play by the rules. So I mean, it's just like I said. We go back and watch some of these episodes. You get some little nuggets like that where things Cassian says early on, and then it turns it on its head.
The revisits in this episode alone are powerful. The revisiting the manifesto and some of those words in this episode alone are really powerful stuff. But we'll probably get to that too. Fredo, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, what I found interesting is that moment that Aaron points out to we'll tell them we'll start in 2 hours, and all of a sudden, the bells ring and you hear the music, and they're also in the Empire scrambling. It's almost like as if the people of Ferrex are trying to regain the power over the Empire and show, no, we're the ones in charge here. This is our home, and we do things our way on our schedule, not on what you tell us is our schedule. Uh, yeah, what I kept thinking of was second line culture here in New Orleans, where for the longest time they did things on their end, and they would butt heads with the city officials and city authorities because they're like, no, you're going to do it on our terms, and it would go back and forth between the people who are governed and the people who say they're in charge. And sure enough, it's the Empire who comes out, and their response is to escalate. They never de-escalate. The
Mm-hmm.
Empire's always like, "You're gonna go here, we're gonna go above you. Oh, you get raised up the stakes, we're gonna go even higher." They don't know how to respond any other way, and bites them in the butt in this episode.
I will say one of my criticisms, because we're going to start talking about Marva's speech, and I love how B2 emo is, at the front of everything. He's leading and I was like going, oh, it was kind of like, you can do anything you want, but don't kill the dog. It's like in movies, it's like, if you do anything to the droid, I'm going to be mad. But I will say, here was the problem with this series, is that, and we talked about this early on, is the number of characters that there are. And so at the beginning of this episode, when they keep flashing back to the kid making bombs, we're like, can't remember, what was that kid's, who is that kid, who's he looking at? It was like, because of the arc structure, and because it's like, okay, we're going to talk about these people in the first 2 episodes, and then we're going to go do something totally different for a while. And then at last episode, it's like, who's the kid making bombs? That was bothersome, but that's minor.
I think in that moment I trusted them. I was like, do I need to know who
Right.
he
Did
is?
it matter? Right.
Does it matter if I know who he is? And I'm thinking to myself, probably not.
But when you find out that it was his dad that they strung up in the street, after I did my research, then yeah, it is kind of,
but
adds a little bit.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, you understand this character's motivation and what he's doing, and it's foreboding. Like, he's building a bomb. That we don't know at that stage of things how coordinated any of this is, but we know somebody's bringing the bomb.
Right.
I saw some people saying that they thought for a moment that it might have been a lightsaber, and I went, no, that's something that's meant to go off. That's Chekhov's bomb that's getting built in Act One.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Marva's speech, the thing that I find really interesting, and again, she says, "We've been asleep for too long." I think that was the line, because in an earlier episode, she makes comment of how, I think, we've been quiet for too long or something. It wasn't sleep, but it was something else. And that made me, and so her final thing, it was really cool. Projection coming out of B2 and talking to everybody. But she was, and just giving everybody the rebel, go for it speech. The thing that I find interesting, it has just totally left my head. But so while I try to get that back, apparently we almost got the first F word in Star Wars at that moment. They're saying that when she says "fight the Empire," there was an article that said Disney was okay with them using the S word earlier on in the second episode, but that there was another one that in the final episode they were not thrilled with, so that it must be the F -- word. But I don't know, what'd you think of Marva's speech to everybody?
I'm like so much else in this series, just a masterclass, because
and you're vindicated by this, Dave, because you called it.
Oh yeah, I said she wasn't going out quietly, and when she died, I was like, I'll just go be quiet over here in my corner because I was wrong. And then, sure enough, yeah, she would not go out quietly. The speech serves two purposes, right? Which is to ramp up the tension in the scene considerably, because her words are fighting words, and the Empire's not going to take that. This thing is escalating. It's going to turn into a fight. There's no way around that. So every moment that sort of passes as this speech is going on, you're becoming more and more aware as the viewer that this is going to turn to violence. And again, we talked about Hitchcock and this idea of sort of building tension gradually and getting to a point where you're like, okay, this thing is going to explode. And it did. But also the words themselves had so much meaning, and they tie so beautifully into what Cassian's mission is ultimately going to become. And again, he's not there yet, but he's getting there, and he's really close at this point. Like from episode 1 to this point, he's almost there. And you mentioned it, by the end of the episode, his conversation with Luthen, he's in it.
So I remember what I was going to say is that, it said we've been asleep too long, and it is kind of speaking also, not to get into a big political conversation here, but I mean the age old, conversation of, the more liberties you give up, or for safety. It goes back to, I mean, I think it's a legitimate argument to have, when it's like, it was recently with the COVID protocols, I mean, I'm not saying that those were bad. It's like, the more I can understand people, it's like the more we give, the government or the people who are ruling our lives, the more we give to them, and do we think they're going to give it back? It's like as it becomes normal, then you forget about how upset you were by it. I think that's and that's what she is saying. I mean, it's like, people griped when there was like that seatbelts are mandatory in cars. Now nobody really talks about it. Unless they, unless they're trying to make some stupid point, like this podcast. But but you know what I mean. It's that and so she is telling everybody it is time to, wake up. You've been giving too much to the Empire. The other thing that stuck out to me is that the line from the last of the jail breakout arc, and that is, power doesn't panic, and the Empire panicked when things were not going the way they thought it was going to. They panicked. Fredo?
Yeah, no, to Marva's speech, I think what's interesting is because we've gotten at least three different rebellious uh, discourses this season. We got Luthen's monologue to Lonnie, where he's talking about what he's doing. We got Nemec's manifesto, which we finally got to hear in full in this episode as Cassian's moving through the city. And then we got Marva's speech. And each one of them is aimed at a different level or different audience. I mean, they're all aimed at us, let's be honest. But like no, like Luthen's speech is directed at somebody like Lonnie who is having doubts about what they're doing. He's there to remind him, like, look, this is not easy, and you're stuck with me, and you might be remembering, we might not be remembering we're doing the good thing. Whereas Marva's speech is all about a call to arms. It's all about you've been asleep, you have let this go on too long, you've thought that this was something that happened on the other side of the galaxy, far away from you. This didn't impact you. Just keep it going.
Yeah,
Don't mind it. And yeah, I mean, there is no way to hear that as an audience member and not think about whether it's the conflict in Ukraine or the very COVID protests that are happening in China right now, where people are,
well,
coming out against their oppressive regime. So
let's take it back
different
further.
audiences for different people.
Yeah, let's take it back further. It's the Declaration of Independence, right? People think that was just saying we are free, but that was a love letter to King George. To actually not King George. They were saying to the world, this guy has done these things. It's like the part that everybody forgets about the Declaration of Independence is the litany of crimes against humanity that they were saying that King George was doing. So that's what Marva's doing here. She's telling everybody, it's like, these are, she's announcing to the world. So, okay, before we move to the other stuff, I've been thinking through this whole series is who is the founder of I'm not a father or mother or founder or whatever of the rebellion. Is it Nemec? Is it Cassian? Is it Luthen? Is it Mon Mothma? You know what I mean? Because you can make arguments for it's like where is the seed? You know, who is responsible for all this? I just find that, again, if I want to link it back to the American Revolution, it's like all those people were meeting together and thinking of one mind. All these people are doing things on their own, and they might interact, but they're not working in conjunction with one another.
Well, the easy answer is it's a gumbo, right? There's multiple answers to the question, but I think the most compelling answer is Cassian, because he's not the leader that you think of, the typical leader. We've talked about this through the course of this show. This is the person who inspires the people around him to take the steps that need to be taken. And he's a direct reflection of Marva in that way. Like her dying action is to inspire other people to act. And he's a chip off the old block in that regard. He's the guy that's doing that. We saw that at the prison. We saw that during their raid of the Imperial facility. You see it again today. This final episode, these people aren't going to act in his best interest if they don't think that he's worth saving and that his cause is their cause. It's like, oh, Cassian, he's okay, I guess. We really liked Marva, but I don't know about that Cassian guy. No, they see him as an extension of her.
I don't know. All the Ferrix, they don't like Cassian. There's a lot of them that are trying to. They Bix says to him that everybody blames you for the Empire being here, and he also had people who he thought were friends who were could turn him in on a dime. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm quite there yet to say that Cassian is the is the one that everybody looks to, because the other thing about this, and we have other things to move to as well, but Luthen can say the same thing about Luthen. Luthen is doing things in the shadows. He's literally in the shadows in this episode. He doesn't do anything, doesn't raise a fist or raise a gun or anything in this battle. Neither does Cassian. Cassian gets his friend, gets Bix out. Everybody else is doing all the dirty work for those two. That's what I kind of find interesting. And
I think, like, my read on that situation is that there's no manipulation involved in any of that, and that it is a direct reflection on their feelings for him, and again for Marva, but also for him. And not everybody feels the same way. Not everybody on the entire planet's gonna like a person, but like, I think by and large, Brass is a good example, right? Like, here's a person, and he's marvelous, and him using her brick,
the brick Imperial,
like the first shot in the rebellion is Marva's brick across somebody's face,
and she would have wanted nothing else other than that, for her to brick to lay out an Imperial. But, like, there's so many people here that you see that are impacted. And again, we can debate in to what degree and how affectionate they are. But I also think, like, the idea of Cassian, and the way that the show works, he was never going to be the institutor of the rebellion, right? In a traditional sense. He wasn't going to be the guy who kicked everything off. But from a certain point of view, looking at the way that he has impacted everybody that he has encountered throughout the course of this series, you could make the argument that he has sort of inspired this spark.
See, I think it's everybody else. This season has been everybody else inspiring him. So, but
That goes both ways.
Well, let's talk about. Oh, go ahead, Fredo.
No, I was just gonna say right quick because I think in a way I could see where Dave's coming from, just from this standpoint. We've noticed that in every one of the interactions, uh, in every one of the characters that we met, they're focused on their own little thing. Very few characters are looking at the bigger picture. Whether it's Saul Guerrera, even Luthen to a certain degree, he is focused on fighting the Empire, but doing it his way. And I think one of the interesting things is that Cassian is meeting the people he's meeting where they're at, whether it's his people in Ferrix and understanding what they can do, whether it's the inmates on Narkina 5, whether it's whoever he's coming across, or they're the folks in Aldani. As he's developing, as he's growing into this role, he is adapting and being more conscientious of who he is. Because it's interesting, the dynamics that he has are different with every one of those characters than they have with other characters that we meet. Because Vel has a different dynamic with Luthen than she has with Cassian. Luthen has a different dynamic with Cassian than he does with Val. So that's just an example. So I could see in a way where you could say that it's characters like Cassian who are more embodying the idea of what will become the Rebel Alliance. Whereas up to this point, Luthen, Mon, Saw, they're all like little cells. They're all doing their own little thing, and nobody's really come together and brought it all. And what we see in the finale, that big bad, the first big fight is people actually rising up and actually becoming a quote unquote rebellion. This is not just disaffected people fighting an oppressive regime. This is now the people rising up.
So Nemec's manifesto. Fredo, you put this down in the notes. What'd you think about that?
Well, first of all, just it's a wonderful piece of writing, and yeah, it's very. I was surprised that first of all how short it was, but also how what he's saying, like we discussed earlier, how he says that the empire's hold is tenuous, how all they need is for people to be afraid, and then like oppression, they have to keep holding it all together. That's the only thing that the empire knows how to do. They recognize that it's going to be a little thing and a little thing and a little thing, and there's going to be one point that's going to break everything, bust open. And part of me was thinking, well, is that one point Ferrix, or is that one point Scarif, or is that one point Yavin? And I was trying to pin out what point they were trying to identify as being the point that finally breaks the dam open against the Empire.
You know what's interesting? Because one of the lines that I think is awesome in that thing is, what is it? Freedom is a pure ideal
idea.
or pure idea. And it's the catch-22, right? Is that we're born free and born of free will, but by God, do we like people making decisions for us?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the catch-22. It's like and without it's the Blazing Saddles line. Nietzsche said, "Out of chaos comes order." It's like I just find that very interesting. And I was also, like I said, going back to one of the previous episodes, everybody was skeptical of Cassian on Aldani except for Nemec. Yeah. And it was a sense that he got from Cassian. Said, I sense that he feels the cause is, but he was like, Cassian never came out and said, and probably didn't even think he was, with the cause, but Nemec saw that in him, so that's why he handed off the manifesto to him, because I think he was probably the only one he thought he could quote unquote trust. I don't know, Dave, what'd you think?
I mean, it was really well conceived, eloquent, just really, really wonderful ideas and present in there. And I liked something you just said about it, which is this idea that rebellions are hard work. it is easier to just, I got a mortgage, and I got the kid, I got the 3 mouths to feed, and I got this and that and the other, and I'm just trying to do my job and come home at night and maybe watch the game, you know.
Well, doesn't Jin say that it's easy if you keep your head down? She
Mm-hmm.
just wants to. Even though she knows, like, just fall in line.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's exactly true. Um, a lot of people aren't going to be motivated to act until they feel that it is absolutely necessary. Um, and and so from that perspective, um, it's really sort of remarkable that they were sort of able to create this riot essentially. And I think like that speaks to her understanding the empire in the same way that Luthen did, that they would escalate, and that all you have to do is walk out into the town square and say a few choice words, and they're going to escalate, and now you got a fight on your hands. And so, like, in one sense, it is kind of remarkable that she was able to inspire these people to act in that way. But then in another, you understand why they've been pushed and shoved and beaten down, and they've had their freedoms taken from them. And at some point, when you get pushed that far, and then when you're in that scenario, when you're standing face to face with your enemy and they're taking a swing at you, like, all right, I'm in this. I'm going to swing back. And so sort of just masterfully all put together in that way. And this is why everybody loves this show. Some people don't love it, I know, but this is why so many people are gushing over this show, is because these are intelligent viewpoints of complex issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like, rebellion isn't just something that you talk about and then go do.
Right.
We're going to rebel today, everybody. Come on, Luke Skywalker, let's do it. It's just not that simple. And it never has been, and it never will be. But like, tonally, etc., like there's a lot of tie-ins to the original stuff here. The original movies were so political, and it was like paved over, right, with this candy sweet goodness of laser beams and laser swords and dogfights and Wookiees and droids and all this fun stuff. But that subtext was always there.
Yeah.
And so that's why this doesn't feel like it's out of bounds or too big of a departure, because the politics were always there.
Now let's talk about, if we're talking about politics, let's talk about Mon Mothma and how sly she is. It was that scene in the car where she like totally chucked her husband under the bus, was so. I have to admit that when I first saw this, when she was like, you're gambling again, you've got gambling problems, he's like, what? No, wasn't me. It was like, my first thought was, he's in on it. That was my first thought, is that he's in on it. But then I, again, just watched one of the episodes last night when she's talking to her ex-boyfriend from Chandrilla, the banker who's going to help, move funds around. She said that her husband is not to be trusted. So she knows exactly what she's doing, and she suckered him and like to plant that information. So now it's going to look like, oh, when I'm moving money around, it's because, my husband, it's not me. My husband's, getting the money to go gamble. I was just like, that was just so sly. It was an awesome scene.
I started laughing right away, like within a half second of her telling him that. After she said, please give us some privacy. I'm like, well, she knows she doesn't have privacy.
Yeah.
So now what's she gonna say? Then she starts in on the gambling, and I'm like, she's so smart. She's so smart, right? Like she's got this figured out. She's like, I'm in trouble. How am I gonna get out of this thing? Well, you're gonna throw, you know, Mr. Jerk husband under the bus because
He
he's
says,
convenient.
"Where would I get the money?" She said, "That's what worries me most." And it's like, so now it's it's feasible to say he's been stealing from my savings account. It's a tale as
Absolutely.
old
And
as time, right?
well, and particularly because he's well known throughout Coruscant as being a bit of a party guy, a bit of a good time guy, your best buddy, your best friend, the guy who's always buying you a drink and schmoozing you up, and you're like, yeah, you can kind of see that. And by the way, I love the little, uh, you know, reference to Canto Bite. I love that.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it shows what I was most struck by it is it's a whole different side to Mon Mothma than I think we've seen up to this point. Because okay, we remember her from her one scene in Return of the Jedi where she's almost crying about how many Mothans died, and then there was some moments in Rogue One with her, which again same dress, same outfit, different actress, and there was a bit of questioning of Leia's involvement in the rebellion from her to Bail Organa. That was it. She's one of the characters I'm most excited about having gotten this season because it's almost like you're looking underneath the hood at the original trilogy, going, "Oh no, these characters that were just we saw for one scene here, one scene there, they had all this breadth of experience and life and sadness and tough times that we never got to know because they were just in one scene. They were not the characters we were
And
following."
leading up to this moment of her throwing her husband under the bus, um, she was always very. I mean, she was involved, but it was like not knowing if she should be involved or how deep she should get into it. There was always a trepidation in her. If you, like I said, watching some of these episodes, she's, like, Luthen, what did you do? But she's in it. But I think she now, within the last two episodes, I think she became committed, and it's like, she's all in, because I don't think she was all in until this moment. But let's to continue the conversation about her. What's she doing with her daughter? I mean, that was something totally she was against. So what do we think? Is I mean, just to placate the dude that's going to help move money around?
She's she's placating him, but she's placating her daughter. I think more importantly, because her daughter's into it, and regardless of what she wants for her daughter, in that moment, it's just probably easier for her to give in to that. And it's like, okay, this is what you want. We're gonna let you have this ritual and the whole rigmarole that goes along with that. Um, but yeah, like you get the distinct impression by the end of this episode that she has literally given up her entire family. And
Yeah, it's
yeah,
yeah. I was just thinking. I mean, she's against it. She clearly is not happy with having to do it because, and it's interesting because both her and Val are coming at it from the same point of view. They're surprised at how into traditional Chandrillan roles and modes of behavior her daughter's engaging into. And it might just be, as somebody who's grown up in multiple cultures, in some ways you do see that with children of immigrants and of migrants where, they grow up in one society, but there's always this curiosity for that other side of their world that they never knew about. So there might
Or
be
the
Mhm.
flip of that. You talk about immigrants to the United States. It's like, you know, when they try to speak their native language and get chastised by parents, say, no, we don't do that. You be as, it's the Irish dropping the O's off of their, their names so they can, Americanize.
Assimilate.
And
Assimilate.
then it's I want to be my culture,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And I think what's interesting is that, I didn't realize, but Vel and Mon are mirroring each other's path. The stuff that Cinta, I mean, is telling Vel about, you get the what's left after the rebellion. Like I think there was on the side of Mon that was behaving much the same way as Vel, where they were trying to keep hold of who they were and all they had and their identity aside from the rebellion. And Cinta's checking Val and telling her, no, you need to be all in, and you're gonna, and whatever's left is what's gonna be us. And I think that's much in the same way for Mon as of this episode. So she's having to realize, no, if I'm gonna be a actual committed member of this rebellion, it's gonna cost me something, and I don't necessarily. She's easy. It's easy to throw disgusting jerk husband over the boat out over the side than it is to serve her daughter up on a platter to a nice kid who's related by blood to a potential crime boss. So,
yeah.
you know, there's lines there, and she's just committed to crossing all of them.
She's crossing all of them at that point, and like this is the stage of that journey that they are both in, and I think it's really astute of you to point out that Val's at the same stage of things, and it's a sheer contrast to Luthen, who during his big speech in the previous episode we heard him say like I'm in, I've given up everything,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to see the reward of that sacrifice in my lifetime, but I'm in because it's too important. And he needs more people around him that have made that sort of commitment ultimately for this thing to get really moving in the direction it needs to move. And so like you can't be like, again, you can't be part way in, half in. I'm trying to have it all. I mean, how many of us have we've all had that debate, like especially parents, where maybe you're super conscious of this choice and maybe you're not, and you just make the decisions because of inertia or whatever, but you are constantly faced with the decision of, am I putting my family first or am I putting my career first, or the things that I believe in, the things I want to achieve in my life, the things that I want to stand for. Is that more important? Or is it these people that I love and cherish above everything else? And there's a balancing scale, tightrope act that we all must engage in on some level, whether we have to make those sorts of decisions. It's like I'm committing to one thing over the other, no matter what. I'm making trade-offs at varying points in my life, or I'm committing to the other thing.
So, talking about loving and cherishing, let's transition to Cyril and Dedra. Uh, what pray tell do we think is going to? Because okay, so I mean, when he sees her in the street, he doesn't care about Cassian or anything else anymore, and I don't think he was expecting to see her in the street. But anyway, he saw her, and so then he saves her when I thought she was going to get eaten by wolves, and I would have been down for it. She's a great Star Wars villain. And actually, it's funny watching some of the earlier episodes. I was actually kind of, wondering. I mean, yeah, she was a bad guy, but kind of a bad guy that was kind of interesting. Then she just became evil. But anyway, so Cyril saves her from the townsfolk, and I was so worried that we were going to get the kiss in the copy room, moment. And I was just, please, Lord, no. And thankfully it didn't happen. However, What do you think we're going to get from the two of these guys in season 2? Because apparently Cyril is he's one of the first people filming, so he's going to be back. But are we going to get a Bonnie and Clyde type of thing here?
I think that gets him. That's his in into the ISB for one. Clearly, he's going to be working with Dedra to hunt down Cassian.
Do you think that's
That's
his
going to be his
play?
mission.
He's going to get into the ISB?
I think. I mean, he just literally saved her life. If nothing else, he's not going back to monitoring air disbursements or whatever menial uh, accounting job his uncle had him doing on Coruscant. He's actually going to be doing the stuff he wants to do. By the way, it's nice of Cyril to leave the sergeant behind, and the poor guy ended up, just forgotten. But
He had his
yeah,
bottle. He was good.
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
It was just he was getting drunk on the street after the big fight. He looked like any guy on on a Mardi Gras street after the parade passed by. But
Yeah,
yeah,
we've all
no,
been there.
we've all been there. Uh, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of dynamic develops between them because part of me is still thinking that there is that whole I call that a fascist meet cute, in our chat because I was like, are they having a rom-com moment between two imperial people? And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Like I said, I was worried they were gonna have a kissing moment there. But I don't necessarily think that that's the way Dedra sees it, even if Cyril wants to. So it's going to be interesting. That is a toxic relationship in the making.
I'm probably not the best person to ask because I thought he was dead as a doornail in this episode, and it didn't happen. But because I just figured he'd be in over his head, and it turns out that she was in over her head, and that was really more of a compelling twist to give us there. That like these fascists who are so sure of themselves when they get faced with a civilian with a brick. Things aren't going the way that I want them to, and now I'm in abject terror
Power
and
doesn't
panicking.
panic. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of fun to see on that level. With this, I still have my doubts that it's a horrific union. We would never want to see it happen. I'm hopeful that it won't. I think she's got better sense than that, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, like she was in a really fragile state in that moment, so you could see why she would not just instantly be like, "Ew, you're gross, get away from me." So maybe, but I don't know. I don't know. But okay, larger role, right? Season 2, how long are we going to see those two? Are they going to make the entire run? Are they going to be the antagonists the rest of the way? I don't know. Like that's an interesting discussion to me, because like he's kind of going on to bigger and better things. We think.
Well, and that's the thing. Okay, so if there's so to kind of we have to put a bow on some of this because we could talk all night about all these things. But here's my problem: is that it's been very clear what Dedra's motivation is through this entire series. That she was very passionate about finding. She was figuring out how the rebellion was working. Nobody was listening to her. Then she realized, okay, I can use this to make my way up the ranks and to prove to people, because the head ISB guy is telling her, basically said, we don't put women in these roles, and so you got to make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's type of a thing. So she started doing that, and she found this is a way she started earning respect in that, and moving up and up. And so you see what her motivation is. Cyril's motivation through this has been unclear. And it seems like I can tell what their focus is, what they're in on. Cyril has just been kind of the Finn of, I like the character of Finn, but it just seems like the one character that didn't get any didn't get as much love as and attention in the writing. Now, however, now this last copy room scene, like I said, he's got leverage. He's got leverage, because he's seen the powerful ISB agent, crawling and scratching and begging for her life, and at her weakest. And how's that going to play in the office? So I don't know. But like I said, I didn't. So I see what's going on now, but throughout the entire season, I didn't really see a clear motivation from him.
I think like he has a obsessive compulsive sort of personality, and that much I think is pretty clear. Like he got fixated on Cassian, and it became a huge thing for him. And now is he fixated more on Deidre instead, or in addition to, or is she still a means to an end, and he's still his first love? It's still Cassian. Because he just never struck me as the type. Like by the time we got to like I don't know the halfway point of this series, I'm like he's never gonna drop this, is he? Like it's just never going to happen. He is going to pursue Cassian until he's dead, and I thought that would occur in this episode, and I still kind of think that that's who he is and where he'll end up.
In some ways, he's a Captain Ahab type.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, he's the Captain Ahab. Yeah.
Yeah, but you knew what Captain Ahab was going after. I mean, but like Cyril's just kind of jumping from. Is he focused on Cassian, and why is he focused on Cassian? It's like, okay, I get maybe the initial why, but it's like, but then it's like, then he's, like you said, then he's fixated on, Dedra, and it's not clear why. Is it because he wants to get information about Cassian and use her to help, find the white whale? Or is it they make a really creepy, scene where he's been admitted to being stalking her? So I don't know. And
I honestly think that, well, she showed him the smallest piece of kindness. So like this, like this stray puppy, like he latched onto her, right? I think that's part of that. But then I also think like he's not an idiot. We haven't seen him. He's just inexperienced, right? He walks out into these situations that he doesn't have any sort of background or experience for. And so he gets his butt handed to him. But then he learns from it, and he comes back, and he's tenacious, and he's still coming back. And you don't get the impression that he's just stupid. So, like, it's certainly within the realm of possibility that he's planning ahead. Oh, Deidre can help me. Get Cassian.
It may well be that.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know, that's where I would place that right now. But again, part of that's because like that's just too gross a union. I just can't. I can't handle that. I just no.
But
no.
I just thank God that we didn't get. I was absolutely 100% sure we were going to get the big smooch fest. So I'm glad we didn't. Well, anyway, let's put a bow on this. I mean, we've got there's some things that were I think at the end, because we have a bullet here of unanswered questions. Cassian's sister. What's up with Kenari? I think those were all MacGuffins to explain how, the Kenari part of it is to explain how, Cassian was with Marva, that they're not, it was just, so I don't know. We'll probably get a little bit of backstory in a book or something like that, but, and she even told him in a couple episodes ago, said, don't even bother going after your sister. Just forget about that. I think that she was telling the whole audience that hey, we're done with Cassian's sister part of this story. That was the thing to get the ball rolling and to get him in trouble. And then, like I said, we'll probably get in a book. That's my thought.
I would be surprised if we don't at least get a bit of a mention if in the journeys, because I could very well see where something where Cassian's asking Luthen to at least put 5 minutes into potentially finding out some of this stuff. Because it's interesting that we spent the first two episodes focusing on Cassian's sister, Kanari, the fact that nobody discusses what Kanari is. He has to pretend he's something else uh, for reasons that are never stated. And I wonder if at some point we might circle back and that might be a bigger point regarding Cassian and who he is. So I wouldn't necessarily think that, you're probably right. We'll probably get the depth of it into a book, but I wouldn't be surprised if Tony, if that's not been set up for payoff somewhere in season two, just as and this is why this is what's important. But yeah, it's interesting that they started so strongly with that, and then you know through the Aldani arc, the Narkina 5 arc, coming back to Ferrex, never brought up again.
I'm going back to Ferrex. I'm going back to Ferrex. I don't think so. Anyway. I don't know, Dave. You have any thoughts on the whole sister or Kanari thing, or any other unanswered questions that we have from this? Anything you felt gypped out of? That
I understand that some people have objections to that story being dropped because there's this whole white person abducts person of color from native environment story that we really didn't go in depth on, and we really didn't talk much about, and I think a lot of people feel gypped by that, and I think that's a legitimate feeling to have. Is it an important piece of this story, of his story, and of where we're headed going into the season 2? I don't know. I mean, I don't.
Well, that's the question.
So.
It's an important story,
Yeah.
but is it important to this story?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's the tough thing.
I think like what you're saying, if they don't touch on it here, they probably should touch on it somewhere else because they open those wounds up for people.
Yeah.
So let's tell that story, and maybe in a comic book, or maybe in a book, or or even another series or something. But for this series, I'm not sure. They need to go back to that. What's important is getting Cassian from where he is now to the point that we see him in Rogue One. And I think he's still got a little further to go.
So I think what will be interesting as we sign off, it'll be the next one we get is what, Ahsoka?
Mandalorian.
Okay,
February.
Mandalorian. Okay, so when we go back to the YA writing, will we be let down? I mean, I think that's a legitimate thing for us to be setting ourselves, because we loved how Andor was written and put together. We got to remember that we're going to be going into, it's going to be apples and oranges with the Mandalorian. So that's my thing to everybody, to set yourself up. You're not going to get. We're gonna go back to a little bit more of the fan servicey stuff. We're gonna go back, So I just hope that Star Wars maintains that balance, and I hope the Acolyte is similar in writing to Andor, for example. So you can have your fan servicey, like I said, YA stuff, and then come back and have, the more serious, adult conversation type of thing like we got with Andor. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see the first watch of Mandalorian season 3 if we all go, like getting a hamburger after you just got, T-bone steak,
I gotta say, Mandalorian,
I like hamburgers, so I'm just saying.
we all love hamburgers, right? The meat, people that like meat in the audience love hamburgers. Mandalorian was not the Book of Boba Fett.
No.
Those were two different series, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Book of Boba Fett was kid in the sandbox with his action figures. And and again, a lot of people like completely forgot about like the first half of that show, which had all the flashbacks with the Tusken Raiders, and so like, you dealt with some things that were a little bit heavier. Mandalorian has always been lone wolf and cub and samurai walking from town to town and Lou Ferrigno's Hulk. It's been that kind of a show. So it's like, if our expectations change, I think that's on us. Again, that show wasn't dumb, right? And I don't. Book of Boba Fett, at times, okay, maybe. Obi-Wan, very prequel sensibility.
Mm-hmm.
I think going back to Mando is going to be the easiest possible transition for folks, because it seems like it has the most to say.
And I guess I'll just kind of add to it is simply that I'm glad that we're gonna go from Andor through Bad Batch to the Mandalorian. Different writing, different, like I said, Dave's pointed it out way back at the start. His kids walked out after, a little bit of watching Andor. It just was not hitting them. Whereas they are big time fans of Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, Grogu, and every one of those episodes. So
It's always Baby
I
Yoda.
I hate the I always hate the idea of everything having to be one. Like I don't want all the Star Wars shows to become Andor. Please don't.
Right.
No.
I would
Lucasfilm never
100% agree with you. That would be like Star Wars shoving its head straight up its own butt. I mean, it would, and smelling its own farts. I totally agree with that. It's, but
South Park.
Yeah.
South Park.
but but it's been what Star Wars has been missing is, like I said, we've been it's kind of add a little bit of fanciness. I don't know. I'm not saying it's better, but it's just been a breath of fresh air, and that's kind of funny after I say smelling your own farts. But anyway,
I hope that's the way we're going to go. I hope that when we get the Mandalorian, it's still delivering the stuff that we like out of it. I hope when we get Ahsoka, it's a slightly different thing. I hope when the Acolyte comes in, it's completely different, because that allows you to get a bit of different flavors. It's a galaxy. It's all these characters. It's all these timelines. If you're getting the same thing over and over and over again, yeah, you're gonna run into a situation where you get a Book of Boba Fett and you go like, but I just got Mandalorian season 2 like 6 months ago. This feels the same. You don't want that. You want it to feel fresh and different and unique, and that's what's gonna keep it alive.
Absolutely.
With that, we will gavel the session into adjournment, and everybody, let us know what you have thought about the Andor series. Hit us up on Twitter, hit us up on Facebook, hit us up on the street, whatever. We'd love to talk to you about it. So until next week, I don't know what we're going to talk about next week, because we don't have Andor back, so we gotta do some homework. But anyway, with that, we will say who dat?
Who dat?
Who dat?
Everybody have a great week.
McConkey.